Sunlight poured through the tall windows of Greenwood Community Hall, where 23 years ago, Eleanor had sat beside John watching their son play an angel in the Christmas pageant. Now she stood at the entrance, holding an invitation to her ex-husband's wedding, her name written in elegant gold script, but no longer bearing his last name. John stood at the altar in a navy suit, smiling at guests with that familiar expression she had seen 1,000 times. The smile of a man who never believed he could be wrong. Then he looked toward the door. Eleanor stepped inside wearing an ivory silk dress. But it wasn't her that made John freeze mid-smile, it was the silver-haired man walking beside her, his hand resting gently on her back with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. Outside, a black Bentley sat quietly in the afternoon sun. John swallowed hard. His fingers tightened around the bridal bouquet until the white roses trembled. "You look, well," he said, almost to himself. Eleanor nodded, not to answer him. The envelope had arrived 3 weeks earlier. Eleanor remembered the exact moment, a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that felt no different from any other. The mailbox at the end of her driveway held the usual collection: a water bill, 2 grocery store flyers, and something else, something heavier, cream-colored paper, gold-embossed lettering. Her name was written in careful cursive across the front. She carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long time before opening it. Mr. John David Whitmore and Miss Melissa Ann Carter request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration. The words blurred together after that. She read the date, the time, the location: Greenwood Community Hall, the same place where Danny had worn angel wings made of wire hangers and cotton balls, where she had cried watching him sing Silent Night off-key, where John had whispered, "We did good, Elle, we really did. That was 17 years ago." Now John was inviting her to watch him marry someone else, in that same hall, on a Sunday afternoon. Eleanor set the invitation down. She didn't crumple it, didn't throw it away. She just looked at it the way you look at something that belongs to a stranger, curious, detached, like finding an old photograph of someone you used to know. The radio on the counter was playing something about gas prices and a baseball game that had already ended. She made herself a cup of tea, Earl Grey, the way she always did. She carried it out to the porch and sat in her usual chair, the wooden one with the worn armrests, the one that creaked when she leaned back. There were 2 chairs on that porch. Hers was faded from years of sun and rain. The other one, John's chair, still looked almost new. He had never sat in it long enough for the wood to remember him. Eleanor sipped her tea and watched the afternoon light move across the garden. The apple tree they had planted their first year of marriage was still there, though half of it had died last winter. She kept meaning to have someone cut down the dead branches. She kept forgetting. Or maybe she just wasn't ready. The phone rang that evening. She knew it would be Danny before she even looked at the screen. Her son, 32 years old now, living in Boston, working too hard at a job he never talked about. He called every Sunday, but this was Thursday. "Mom," his voice was tight. "Did you get it?" "The invitation, yes." "You're not going." It wasn't a question. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the phone pressed to her ear. Through the window, she could see the first stars appearing above the tree line. "He invited me," she said. "He invited you to humiliate you." Danny's voice cracked. "The whole town will be there, Mom. Everyone will see you sitting alone while he marries some woman half his age. He's doing this on purpose. He wants you to feel small." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Danny," she said, "do you remember when you were 7, the Christmas pageant at Greenwood Hall? Mom, you were so nervous you forgot half your lines. But when they put those angel wings on you, you stood up so straight, like you were the most important person in the room. What does that have to do with anything? I'm not afraid of what people will say. Sweetheart, I've listened to people whisper about me for more than 2 decades. When your father came home late, when he forgot my birthday, when he looked at other women at company parties, I heard every word. I just never let them see that I heard. Then why go? Why give him the satisfaction? Eleanor looked out at the darkening sky. Because if I stay home, she said slowly, I'll spend the whole day wondering why I was too scared to walk through that door. Danny was silent for a long time. I hate him, he finally said. I hate what he did to you. I know, baby. You deserve better. Mom, you always did. Eleanor smiled, though he couldn't see it. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I just deserve to stop waiting for someone to tell me what I deserve. She had been going to Greenfield's grocery every Thursday morning for as long as she could remember. It was a small store, family-owned, the kind of place where the cashiers knew your name and asked about your grandchildren. Eleanor liked it because it was quiet, because the apples were always fresh, and because nobody there expected anything from her. The smell of ripe fruit and fresh bread greeted her every time she pushed through the door, familiar as an old friend. She first noticed him about 4 months after the divorce was finalized. He was standing near the produce section, a tall man with silver hair and work-worn hands, staring at the apples like he was trying to solve a complicated math problem. He wore a flannel shirt, faded jeans, and boots that had seen better days. Eleanor didn't think much of it. She picked her apples Honeycrisp, always Honeycrisp, and moved on. But the next Thursday, he was there again, same spot, same expression, same flannel shirt, or maybe a different one in the same color. The third, Thursday, she dropped an apple. It rolled across the floor and stopped at his feet. He bent down, picked it up, and handed it back to her. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." He had a deep voice, quiet and unhurried. Honeycrisp. She nodded. "They're the best." "My wife used to say that." He paused. "She passed 10 years ago." Eleanor didn't know what to say, so she said the only honest thing she could think of, "I'm sorry." He shrugged, not dismissively, just the way someone shrugs when they've made peace with something painful. "Do you need help carrying your bags?" he asked. "I can manage." "I'm sure you can. But the offer stands." She declined that day, and the next Thursday, and the Thursday after that. But she noticed him every time, noticed how he never bought anything, just walked through the aisles slowly, like he was visiting an old friend. Noticed how he held the doors for strangers and said please and thank you to the teenagers working the registers. Noticed how he never seemed to be in a hurry. On the 8th Thursday, she asked him his name. "Henry," he said. "Eleanor." They shook hands. His grip was firm but gentle, like someone who knew his own strength and chose not to use it. "Do you always come here on Thursdays?" she asked. "Every week, for 10 years. He almost smiled. "Margaret, my wife, she loved this store. Said the apples here were better than anywhere else. I don't know if that's true, but I keep coming back. That's a long time to buy apples you don't eat." "I eat them." He picked up a Honeycrisp and turned it over in his hand. "I just don't enjoy them the way she did, but I figure, if I keep showing up, maybe one day I will." Eleanor looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time. His face was lined, but kind. His eyes were the color of worn denim, and they held something she recognized. Not sadness, exactly. More like patience. The kind that comes from waiting without knowing what you're waiting for. She noticed something else too, his watch. Simple face, leather band. But the way it caught the light suggested it wasn't the kind you bought at a department store. She filed it away and said nothing. "That's either very romantic or very stubborn," she said. "Probably both." He set the apple down. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on what it is." Why do you take so long choosing apples? I've watched you stand here for 15 minutes sometimes. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm slightly. I don't know, she admitted. I suppose. It's the only decision I get to make that's entirely mine. No one else cares which apple I pick. So I take my time. Henry nodded slowly, like she had said something important. Well, I'll be, he said quietly. That makes more sense than most things I've heard in years. By the 10th Thursday, Eleanor had told him about John. Not everything, just the facts. More than 2 decades of marriage. A son, a divorce that felt less like an ending and more like finally exhaling after holding her breath too long. Henry listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, Sounds like he didn't know what he had. Maybe, Eleanor said. Or maybe I didn't know what I was worth. Those aren't the same thing. She looked at him. Aren't they? No. He picked up her grocery bag and carried it toward the door. One is about him being blind. The other is about you learning to see. They walked out into the parking lot together. Eleanor's old Honda was parked next to a battered Ford pickup, the kind of truck that farmers drove, with faded paint and a rearview mirror held on with tape. That yours? She asked. 12 years old and still running. He loaded her bags into her trunk. See you next Thursday. I suppose so. And he tipped an imaginary hat, an old-fashioned gesture that should have been corny but somehow wasn't, and climbed into his truck. As he drove away, Eleanor noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small sticker on the back window faded, barely visible. 3 letters, MHC. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't ask, but she sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine, and for the first time in months, she was looking forward to something. The invitation sat on her kitchen table for 2 weeks. She looked at it every morning over coffee, every evening before bed. She memorized every word, every curve of the calligraphy, every gold fleck in the embossed lettering. John had spent money on this wedding, real money. The kind of money he had always said they couldn't afford when she asked about remodeling the kitchen or taking a vacation somewhere warm. The wedding was scheduled for the last Sunday in October, 2 weeks away. Eleanor still hadn't decided if she would go. Then, on the 3rd Thursday after the invitation arrived, she told Henry about it. They were standing in their usual spot by the apples. The morning light was gray, threatening rain. Henry was wearing the same flannel shirt he always wore, or maybe he owned 5 identical ones. She couldn't tell. He invited you to his wedding. Henry's voice was neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Yes. To watch him marry another woman? Yes. In the same hall where you used to take your son? Yes. Henry was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question she had been asking herself for 2 weeks. Do you want to go? Eleanor picked up a Honeycrisp and turned it over in her hands. I don't know, she said. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks it's a terrible idea. Part of me doesn't care either way. Which part is winning? She set the apple down. The part that's tired of being afraid. Henry nodded slowly. If you go, he said, you shouldn't go alone. Eleanor looked at him. Are you offering? I'm asking if you'd let me. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the gray stubble on his jaw, the quiet steadiness that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a wood stove. You don't know anything about John, she said. You don't know anything about me, really. Why would you do this? Henry reached into the apple bin and pulled out a Honeycrisp. He examined it carefully, then handed it to her. First week I saw you here, he said. You dropped an apple. It rolled across the floor. You picked it up, wiped it clean, and put it back on the shelf for someone else to buy. So you didn't know anyone was watching. You just did it because it was the right thing to do. He shrugged. That's enough for me. Eleanor held the apple in her hands. It was cool and smooth, perfectly red. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. Before we continue, I'd love to know where are you reading from tonight? Whether you're on your porch with evening tea or tucked in for the night. drop a comment, and say hello. As my grandmother used to say, the best stories are the ones we share together. The Sunday morning arrived gray and cool, the kind of October day that couldn't decide between rain and shine. Eleanor stood in front of her bedroom mirror, holding the ivory silk dress she had bought 6 years ago for her 50th birthday. John had come home late that night, some work emergency. He said, and she had hung the dress back in the closet without ever wearing it. Now she slipped it on. The silk was cool against her skin. She zipped up the back, adjusted the collar, and looked at herself. The woman in the mirror looked older than she remembered, but not tired, not beaten. Just present. She didn't bother with jewelry. No necklace, no earrings. She brushed her silver hair back and pinned it simply. At exactly 2 o'clock, she heard tires on gravel. Eleanor walked to the front window and stopped. It wasn't the Ford pickup. A black Bentley sat in her driveway, its paint gleaming even under the overcast sky. Henry stood beside it, wearing a simple button-down shirt, no tie, no jacket. He looked exactly like himself, except for the car. She opened the front door. "I thought your truck broke down," she said. Henry's mouth twitched. "Borrowed this from my nephew. The AC works better." Eleanor looked at the car, then at Henry, then back at the car. She knew he wasn't telling the truth. She also knew she wasn't going to ask. "All right," she said. He opened the passenger door for her. The leather interior smelled new, expensive. Eleanor lowered herself into the seat and felt the door close behind her with a solid, heavy sound. Henry slid behind the wheel. The engine was so quiet she barely heard it start. They drove in silence for the first few minutes. Fields rolled past, then houses, then the edge of town. Eleanor watched the familiar streets slide by the pharmacy where she used to pick up John's prescriptions, the diner where they had celebrated their 10th anniversary, the church where Danny had been baptized. "You don't have to prove anything today," Henry said, eyes on the road. "You know that, right?" "I know. So why are we going?" Eleanor turned to look at him. His profile was calm, unhurried. "Because I spent all those years being invisible," she said. "I want to see if I still am." Henry nodded once. Ahead, the Greenwood Community Hall appeared through the trees and the parking lot was already full. The gravel crunched under Eleanor's shoes as she stepped out of the Bentley. Heads turned. She could feel them, the eyes, the sudden pause in conversations, the way people leaned toward each other to whisper. The parking lot was full of familiar cars, familiar faces. Margaret, from next door, stood near the entrance with her husband, their mouths slightly open. Tom Wheeler, who had worked with John for 15 years, stopped mid-step and stared. Henry came around the car and stood beside her. He didn't offer his arm. He just waited. Eleanor smoothed the front of her dress and walked toward the entrance. The hall looked exactly as she remembered: white columns, wide glass doors, the same faded welcome sign that had hung there since Danny's Christmas pageant. Someone had decorated the entrance with white roses and silver ribbons. The flowers were fresh, expensive, their scent heavy in the cool air. She pushed through the doors. Inside, the ceremony hadn't started yet. Guests milled around in clusters, holding champagne flutes and small plates of appetizers. A string quartet played something classical in the corner, white fabric draped from the ceiling, catching the afternoon light. And then the whispers started. "Is that Eleanor? She actually came? Who's the man with her?" Eleanor kept walking. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor. She could feel Henry behind her, close but not crowding. A woman in a white dress emerged from a side room. Melissa. She was younger than Eleanor had imagined, mid-30s, with honey blonde hair and a figure that belonged on magazine covers. Her wedding gown was all lace and pearls, fitted perfectly to show off every curve. She laughed at something her bridesmaid said. then turned and saw Eleanor. The laugh died. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Melissa walked over, her heels silent on a strip of white carpet someone had laid down the center aisle. Up close, her makeup was flawless. Her perfume smelled like gardenias and money. "Eleanor." Melissa's voice was sweet, controlled. "How wonderful that you could make it. John said you might come, but I wasn't sure. I never miss an invitation." Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. She glanced at Henry, then back at Eleanor. "John talks about you sometimes," she said. "He says you were always so traditional, so dependable." She made it sound like a disease. "I'm glad you found someone to keep you company." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, not anger, not hurt, just a quiet clarity. This woman thought she was being clever, thought she was winning something. "Thank you for having me," Eleanor said. "The flowers are lovely." Melissa blinked, thrown off by the lack of reaction. Before she could respond, a hand touched Eleanor's elbow. John. He had aged in the year since she'd last seen him, more gray at his temples, deeper lines around his mouth. But he wore the same expression she had known for 2 decades, the one that said he was in control, that everything was going according to plan. "Eleanor." His voice was tight. "I didn't think you'd actually come. You invited me. I was being polite. Then I'm being polite back." John's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to Henry, standing a few feet away with his hands in his pockets. "Who is this? A friend." "A friend." John's voice dropped lower. "You show up to my wedding with some stranger in a suit, driving a car that costs more than our house, and you expect me to believe he's just a friend." Eleanor looked at her ex-husband, studied the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers were curled into fists at his sides. "I don't expect you to believe anything, John. I stopped expecting things from you a long time ago." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or the beginning of doubt. "Eleanor, the ceremony is starting soon." She nodded toward the altar, where a minister had appeared. "You should probably go stand where you're supposed to stand." John opened his mouth to say something else, then closed it. He looked at Henry one more time, a long look, searching for something he couldn't name, then turned and walked toward the front of the hall. Eleanor found a seat in the back row. Henry sat beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't lean in to whisper reassurances. He just sat there, solid and present. The ceremony began. Eleanor watched John take his place at the altar, watched Melissa glide down the aisle on her father's arm, watched them exchange vows of the same vows she and John had spoken 24 years ago, in a small church across town, when she had believed every word. She didn't feel pain, she didn't feel jealousy. She felt oddly distant, like watching a movie about someone else's life. Halfway through the ceremony, Henry stood up and walked toward the refreshment table. He returned a minute later with 2 cups of coffee, black, and set one in front of her without a word. Eleanor picked it up. The warmth spread through her fingers. She looked at John, standing at the altar with his new bride. Then she looked at the coffee in her hands, brought by a man who had asked nothing from her except whether she liked Honeycrisp apples. That was when a voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me, Henry Morrison." Eleanor turned. A man in a gray suit was walking toward their row, his face pale, his hand already extended. She recognized him, Richard Donnelly, John's business partner, the one who always talked too loud at parties. Richard stopped at the end of the pew, his eyes wide, his voice dropped to an urgent whisper, but in the hush of the ceremony, it carried. "I thought I recognized you earlier, but I wasn't sure. You're Henry Morrison, aren't you? From the business journals I saw your photograph years ago, Morrison Holdings." Every head in the room turned toward them, and John, standing at the altar with his bride's hands in his, went completely still. The string quartet stopped playing. Eleanor watched the change ripple through the room like wind across water. Heads turned. Whispers spread. Richard Donnelly was still standing there with his hand extended, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Morrison Holdings," Richard repeated. Louder now, as if saying it again would help everyone understand. "The real estate group. One of the largest in the Northeast. I saw your photograph in a business magazine years ago. You were featured for your charitable work. You almost never appear publicly." Henry stood slowly. He didn't reach for Richard's hand, didn't confirm or deny anything. He just stood there with the same quiet patience Eleanor had seen every Thursday morning at the grocery store. "Richard," Henry's voice was calm, "this isn't really the time." But what are you doing here?" Richard's eyes darted to Eleanor, then back to Henry. "How do you know—" "We're friends." The word hung in the air. Eleanor could feel it, the shift in the room, the recalculation happening behind every pair of eyes. She saw Margaret from next door leaning over to whisper to her husband. Saw Tom Wheeler pull out his phone, probably already typing a text. Saw the minister at the altar clear his throat awkwardly, unsure whether to continue. And she saw John. He had dropped Melissa's hands. His face had gone pale, then red, then something in between. He was staring at Henry with an expression Eleanor had never seen before, not anger, exactly, but something closer to confusion, like the world had suddenly rearranged itself and he couldn't find his footing. Melissa grabbed his arm. "John. John." "Who is that man?" John didn't answer. He walked down the aisle toward Eleanor's row. His steps were uneven, his breathing audible. When he reached them, he stopped. His hands hung at his sides. "Eleanor!" His voice cracked on her name. "What is this? It's your wedding. John. I'm just a guest." "You brought Henry Morrison to my wedding." He said it like an accusation. "Do you have any idea who he is? Do you have any idea?" "I know who he is." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor looked at her ex-husband, at the man she had cooked breakfast for every morning, the man whose shirts she had ironed, whose socks she had folded, whose silence she had endured for more than 2 decades. "You didn't ask." John's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I asked you who he was." "You said a friend." "He is a friend. Friends don't drive Bentleys. Eleanor—" "Some do." John's hands clenched into fists. A vein pulsed at his temple. Behind him, Melissa was walking down the aisle, her white dress dragging across the floor, her face twisted with something between fury and fear. "What is going on?" Melissa's voice was shrill. "John, why aren't you at the altar? Who are these people?" John turned to her. "That man, the one with Eleanor, his name is Henry Morrison." "I don't know who that is." "Morrison Holdings, one of the biggest real estate developers in the region. He's been featured in magazines. He almost never makes public appearances, that's why nobody recognized him at first." John stopped, swallowed. He could probably buy this entire town if he wanted to. Melissa's face changed. She looked at Henry, then at Eleanor, then back at Henry. Her eyes dropped to Eleanor's bare fingers, no rings, no jewelry, then rose to take in the simple ivory dress. "You came here to humiliate us," Melissa said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You planned this." Eleanor shook her head. "I came because John invited me. I came with Henry because he offered to drive. That's all." "That's all?" Melissa laughed, a high, brittle sound. "You expect me to believe that? You show up with one of the wealthiest men in the state and expect me to believe it's just a coincidence. I don't expect you to believe anything." Eleanor stood. Her legs were steady. Her hands were still. "I don't expect anything from either of you." She turned to Henry. "I think I'd like to go now." Henry nodded. He didn't look at John or Melissa. Didn't acknowledge Richard, who was still standing nearby with his mouth hanging open. He simply took a step back, giving Eleanor room to move past him toward the aisle, but John stepped into her path. "No." His voice was raw. "No. You don't get to just walk away. You don't get to drop this bomb and leave." "I didn't drop anything. John, Richard recognized Henry. That's not my fault." "But you knew. You knew who he was, and you brought him here anyway." Eleanor met his eyes. She could smell his cologne, the same brand he'd worn for 30 years. Could see the tiny scar on his chin from a shaving accident when Danny was 3. Could feel the weight of all those years pressing down on her shoulders. "I brought him because he asked me if I wanted company," she said. "That's a question you never asked." "Not once in all those years." John flinched. Behind them, the room had gone completely silent. 100 people stood frozen, watching. The minister had stepped down from the altar. Melissa was gripping her bouquet so tightly the stems were bending. Eleanor waited. John's mouth worked, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was not as solid as he'd thought. She stepped around him. Henry fell into step beside her. Their footsteps echoed against the hardwood floor, hers clicking. His solid and sure. She didn't look back at the altar, didn't look at the guests, didn't look at the white roses or the silver ribbons or the champagne flutes abandoned on every table. She was almost to the door when John's voice cut through the silence. "Eleanor, wait." She stopped. Her hand was on the door handle. The metal was cool beneath her palm. "Please." His voice broke on the word. "Just please. I need to talk to you. Alone." Eleanor didn't turn around, but her hand didn't push the door open either. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the door handle. Behind her, she could hear the rustle of fabric, the shuffle of feet, the collective held breath of 100 wedding guests. The metal was cold against her palm. The sunlight through the glass doors made her squint. "Henry?" Her voice was quiet. "Would you give us a moment?" Henry looked at her. His eyes asked a question she couldn't answer. Then he nodded once and stepped outside, letting the door swing closed behind him. Eleanor turned. John stood 10 feet away. His navy suit looked rumpled now, his tie slightly askew. Sweat glistened at his hairline. Behind him, Melissa stood frozen at the altar. Her white dress pooled around her feet like spilled milk. "Not here," Eleanor said. "Outside." She pushed through the door without waiting for his response. The October air hit her face cool, clean, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant rain. The Bentley sat in the parking lot like a black mirror. Henry leaned against it, arms crossed, watching. John followed her out. The door banged shut behind him. They stood on the front steps of a Greenwood hall, facing each other, the same steps where they had posed for photographs at Danny's 8th grade graduation. The same steps where John had once held her hand and promised they would grow old together. "Eleanor." John's voice was hoarse. "I didn't know. Didn't know what about him, about," he gestured vaguely toward Henry. "I never would have invited you if I'd known you were seeing someone like that." Eleanor studied her ex-husband's face, the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the way his jaw kept clenching and unclenching, like he was chewing on words he couldn't swallow. "Someone like what? You know what I mean." "I don't think I do." John's hands curled into fists. "Don't play games with me. Eleanor, you show up with one of the wealthiest men in the region on your arm, and you expect me to believe it's just some Thursday morning coincidence. Thursday morning. Richard told me. He said Morrison goes to the same grocery store every week. Has for years." John's voice dropped. "You planned this. You targeted him." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not anger. Something colder. "I targeted him," she repeated. "What else am I supposed to think? You're not exactly the kind of woman who—" John stopped himself, but too late. "The kind of woman who what?" John looked away. His throat worked. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. Silence. A car drove past on the road behind them. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the white roses from inside the hall. Eleanor took a breath. I met Henry at the grocery store, she said. He was standing by the apples, looking lost. His wife used to shop there before she died. He goes back every week because it makes him feel close to her. John's jaw tightened. That's very touching. He didn't tell me he had money. He drove an old truck, wore flannel shirts, never bought anything, just walked the aisles and left. Eleanor paused. He started talking to me because I dropped an apple, that's it. That's the whole story. You expect me to believe he didn't know who you were, that he wasn't. He knew nothing about you, nothing about me. He only knew that I took a long time choosing apples, and he found that interesting. John laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Interesting. Right. He asked me questions, John, about what I liked, what I wanted, what I thought about things. Eleanor's voice stayed level. Do you know how long it had been since someone asked me a question and actually waited for the answer? John's face changed. Something flickered behind his eyes, recognition. Maybe. Or the beginning of it. I asked you questions. No. You told me things. You told me what we were doing for dinner, what time you'd be home, what I should wear to your company parties. Eleanor shook her head. That's not the same. I was working. I was building a career. I know. I was there, ironing your shirts at midnight so you'd look sharp for your meetings, picking up your dry cleaning, making excuses to Danny when you missed his baseball games. Eleanor's hands were trembling now, not with anger, but with something else, something that had been building for years. I was there for all of it, John, and you never once asked me how I felt about any of it. John took a step back. His face had gone pale. That's not fair. Fair. Eleanor laughed softly. You invited me to your wedding, to watch you marry a woman half your age, in the same hall where our son played an angel in the Christmas pageant, and you want to talk to me about fair? John opened his mouth, closed it. The wind shifted. From inside the hall, Eleanor could hear voices murmuring, questioning. Melissa's shrill tone cutting through the noise. I didn't invite you to hurt you, John said finally. I invited you because... He stopped. Eleanor waited. Because what? John's shoulders dropped. For the first time since she'd known him. He looked old, not tired old, like something had drained out of him. Because I wanted you to see, he said quietly. I wanted you to see that I'd moved on, that I was happy. He paused. I wanted you to regret letting me go. Eleanor stared at him. The words hung in the air between them, more than 2 decades of marriage compressed into a single. Ugly truth. I didn't let you go. John. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You left. John flinched like she'd slapped him. Behind them, the hall doors swung open. Melissa stood in the doorway, her mascara running, her bouquet crushed against her chest. John, her voice was razor sharp, get back inside, now. We have a wedding to finish. John didn't move. He was staring at Eleanor with an expression she had never seen before, not in all their years of marriage, not in the year since their divorce. It was the look of a man who had just realized he was standing in the wrong place. Eleanor, he said, I think I made a mistake. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Eleanor stood motionless. The October wind tugged at her dress, lifted strands of silver hair across her face, behind John. Melissa's expression shifted from anger to something raw fear, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. A mistake, Eleanor repeated. John's face crumpled, not dramatically, just a slight collapse around the edges, like a building settling on a weak foundation. I thought I knew what I wanted, he said. I thought He stopped, swallowed. I thought starting over would fix everything. New house, new life, new wife. John flinched. Melissa pushed past him, her white dress dragging across the concrete steps. Up close. Eleanor could see the cracks in her composure, the smudged mascara, the trembling lip, the way her fingers were crushing the stems of her bouquet. "Don't you dare," Melissa hissed. "Don't you dare stand there and tell her you made a mistake. Not today, not on our wedding day." John turned to her. "Melissa, I gave up everything for you." Her voice rose. "I left my apartment. I quit my job. I moved across 3 states because you said you wanted to build a life together." She jabbed a finger at Eleanor. "And now you're telling her that it was a mistake. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" John's mouth opened, closed. He looked like a man caught between 2 oncoming trains, unable to move in either direction. Eleanor watched him, watched the way his hands hung limp at his sides, watched the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air, watched the slow disintegration of the confidence he had worn like armor for as long as she'd known him. She should have felt something. Satisfaction. Maybe. Or vindication. More than 2 decades of being overlooked, undervalued, taken for granted, and here he was, finally seeing what he had thrown away. But she felt nothing, just a hollow space where the anger used to be. John. Her voice was quiet, steady. "Go back inside. Finish your wedding." He stared at her. "What? You heard me. Go inside, say you. Say your vows. Cut the cake." She paused. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? A fresh start." "Eleanor, I just told you. I know what you told me." She took a step back. The gravel crunched under her heels. "But I didn't come here to win you back. I didn't come here to make you jealous. I came here because you invited me, and I wanted to see if I could walk through that door without feeling small." John's face twisted. "And did you—" Eleanor considered the question. She thought about the whispers when she'd entered the hall, the way Melissa had looked at her first with pity, then with fear. The weight of all those eyes, all those judgments, pressing down on her shoulders. And then she thought about Henry, standing by the apples every Thursday morning, asking her what kind she liked, carrying her bags to the car without expecting anything in return. "Yes," she said. "I did." John took a step toward her. "Eleanor, please, just give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to—" "To what?" She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. "To tell me you're sorry, to tell me you didn't realize what you had until you saw me with someone else." She shook her head slowly. "I waited more than 20 years for you to notice me. John, I'm not waiting anymore." Melissa let out a sound half sob, half laugh. Her mascara was running freely now, black streaks cutting through her perfect makeup. "This is insane," she said. "This is absolutely insane. You're choosing her after everything." "I'm not choosing anyone." John's voice cracked. I don't know what I'm doing anymore." "Well, figure it out." Melissa's voice turned cold. "Because I'm going back inside. And when I get to that altar, you'd better be standing next to me. Or don't bother coming back at all." She spun on her heel and marched up the steps. The doors swung open, then slammed shut behind her. Through the glass, Eleanor could see the wedding guests milling around, their faces turned toward the entrance like flowers seeking sun. John didn't move. He stood on the steps, his navy suit wrinkled, his tie crooked, his face a map of confusion and regret. The man who had always known exactly what he wanted. The man who had built his entire life on certainty. Now he looked lost. "Eleanor," his voice was barely above a whisper, "I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know I threw away something good, but if there's any chance at all, there isn't." The words came out before she could stop them. Clean. Final. like closing a door that had been stuck open for too long. John's face went slack. "I don't hate you." "John." Eleanor's hands were steady now. Her voice was calm. "I don't wish you ill, but I spent more than 2 decades trying to be enough for you. Trying to be the wife you wanted, the mother you expected, the woman you could be proud of." She paused. "And you know what I learned I was never going to be enough, not because something was wrong with me, Oni, but because you weren't looking." John's eyes glistened. "That's not, you looked right through me. Every morning at breakfast, every night at dinner, every time I tried to tell you how I felt." Eleanor's voice didn't waver. "I was furniture to you, John. A comfortable chair, something you sat in without ever really seeing." A tear slid down John's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "I'm seeing you now," he said. "I know." Eleanor smiled a small, sad smile. "That's a tragedy, isn't it? You only see me now because someone else did first." The wind picked up. Leaves scattered across the parking lot, red and gold against the black asphalt. The Bentley sat silent in its spot, Henry still leaning against the hood, watching without interfering. John turned to look at him. Really look at him. "He makes you happy." Eleanor considered the question. Happy wasn't quite the right word. Henry didn't make her happy the way a gift makes someone happy, or a surprise, or a compliment. He made her feel something simpler, something she hadn't felt in years. "He sees me," she said. "That's enough." John nodded slowly. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked exactly like the young man she had married, uncertain, hopeful, terrified of making the wrong choice. Then the moment passed, and he was just John again, older, grayer, standing alone on the steps of a wedding hall while his bride waited at the altar. "I should go inside," he said. "Yes." "Melissa is waiting." "She is." John took a step toward the door, then stopped. "Eleanor?" He didn't turn around. "I really did love you. In my own way." Eleanor watched his back, the familiar slope of his shoulders, the way he held himself when he was trying not to fall apart. "I know," she said. But your way wasn't enough. John stood there for a long moment. Then he pushed through the doors and disappeared into the hall. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking now, not much, but enough to notice. The adrenaline that had been carrying her was starting to fade, leaving behind something raw and unfinished. She walked toward the Bentley. Henry straightened as she approached, his eyes searching her face. "You okay?" "I don't know." He nodded, opened the passenger door, waited. Eleanor paused with her hand on the frame. "He said he made a mistake," she said. "I heard. He said he loved me." "I heard that too." She looked at Henry, at his weathered face, his patient eyes, the quiet strength that radiated from him. "Did you know," she asked, "when you offered to come with me, did you know something like this would happen?" Henry was silent for a moment. "I knew that a man who invites his ex-wife to his wedding," he said slowly, "is either very cruel or very lost. Which one is John?" Henry looked past her, toward the hall where the wedding was presumably resuming, where John was standing at an altar, making vows to a woman he wasn't sure he loved, in front of guests who would whisper about this day for years. "I reckon," Henry said. "He's both." Eleanor climbed into the car. The leather seat was cool against her back. She leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Behind them, the doors of Greenwood Hall swung open again, but it wasn't John who emerged. It was Melissa, still in her wedding dress, mascara streaking her face, running toward them across the parking lot. Melissa's heels caught on the gravel. She stumbled, caught herself on the hood of a parked car, and kept coming. Eleanor watched through the windshield. The bride's face was red and blotchy. her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. The wedding dress, all that lace and pearl, was streaked with dirt where she had brushed against something inside. Henry didn't start the car. Melissa reached them in seconds. She slammed her palm against the passenger window so hard the glass shuddered. "Get out!" Her voice was raw. "Get out of the car!" Eleanor looked at Henry. He sat motionless, hands on the steering wheel, waiting. "Please," Eleanor said quietly. "Just drive." "Get out!" Melissa screamed. She pounded on the window again. "You don't get to leave. You don't get to ruin my wedding and just drive away." The hall doors opened again. Guests spilled out onto the steps, Margaret and her husband, Tom Wheeler, Richard Donnelly, a dozen others. They stood there watching, phones already raised. Eleanor's stomach turned. She opened the car door. "Eleanor." Henry's voice was low. "You don't have to do this." "I know." She stepped out onto the gravel. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain and crushed leaves. Melissa stood 2 feet away, her chest heaving, her fists clenched at her sides. "You planned this," Melissa said. "From the beginning. You knew who he was, and you planned this whole thing to humiliate me." "I didn't plan anything." "Liar." Melissa's voice cracked. "You show up with one of the wealthiest men in the state. You make John look at you like she couldn't finish." "Like what?" "Like he made a mistake." Melissa's face twisted. "He told me he loved me. He told me I was everything he ever wanted, and then you walk in and suddenly I'm nothing. I'm just some young girl he's using to feel better about getting old." Eleanor said nothing, because she recognized the look on Melissa's face, recognized the tremors in her voice, the desperation in her eyes. She had worn that same expression for more than 2 decades, the expression of a woman trying to hold on to something that was never really hers. "He chose you," Eleanor said quietly. "He left me to be with you. Whatever happened today, that doesn't change." Melissa laughed a broken, ugly sound. "Chose me. He didn't choose me to. He chose not to be alone." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. "I was convenient, young, pretty, the kind of girl who makes other men jealous." Her voice dropped. "I thought that would be enough." The crowd on the steps had grown. Eleanor could hear the murmurs, the whispered questions, the click of phone cameras. This moment would be all over social media by nightfall. The wedding that fell apart. The wealthy stranger who showed up. The ex-wife who stood in the parking lot while the bride screamed. "It wasn't," Melissa said. "It was never going to be enough." She turned and looked at the hall, at the white ribbons and the rose petals and the minister standing awkwardly by the door, at the life she had imagined, crumbling in real time. Then she looked back at Eleanor. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Her voice was almost calm now, almost steady. "I knew. I knew from the beginning that he still thought about you. He kept pictures of your son in his wallet, not pictures of me, of your son. He talked about your house like it was his house. He called me Eleanor once, in his sleep." Eleanor's chest tightened. "I told myself it didn't matter." Melissa continued. "I told myself I could make him forget. I was younger, prettier, better." She laughed again, that same broken sound. "But you can't compete with all those years. You can't compete with a whole life." The hall doors swung open one more time. John emerged. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. His tie was gone now. He must have yanked it off inside. His jacket was unbuttoned. His face was gray. His eyes red-rimmed. He walked down the steps slowly, deliberately, like each foot was made of lead. The crowd parted for him. No one spoke. "Melissa!" His voice was barely audible. "Come inside, please." She turned to face him. "Come inside," she laughed. "Come inside and pretend this didn't happen. Pretend you didn't just tell your ex-wife that marrying me was a mistake." "I didn't say that." You said it with your eyes. You said it with every look you gave her. Melissa's voice rose again. You've been saying it for months, John, every time you got quiet after dinner, every time you stared at old photographs, every time you called me the wrong name. John's face went white. That was once. I apologized. Once that I heard. Melissa stepped toward him. Her dress dragged through a puddle of mud left over from yesterday's rain, the white lace turning brown at the hem. How many times did you say it in your head? How many times did you look at me and wish I was her? John opened his mouth, closed it. I can't answer that, he said finally. Melissa stared at him. The crowd on the steps was completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. You can't answer that, she repeated. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. Her voice broke. For once in your life, John, tell me the truth. Did you ever love me, or was I just a way to prove you could start over? John looked at her, then at Eleanor, then at the crowd of guests who had come to celebrate his new beginning and were now watching his world collapse. I thought I loved you, he said. I wanted to love you. Melissa's face crumpled. Wanted to. She repeated the words like they were poison. You wanted to love me. I'm sorry. You're sorry. She took another step toward him. Her heel caught on her dress. The fabric ripped a long, ugly tear from knee to ankle. She didn't seem to notice. You're sorry for what? For wasting 2 years of my life, for making me believe I was special, for inviting your ex-wife to our wedding so you could compare us. John didn't answer. I gave up everything for you. Melissa's voice was rising toward hysteria. My apartment, my friends, my job. I moved to this town where nobody knows me, where your ex-wife lives 3 miles away, where everyone looks at me like I'm the homewrecker who stole poor Eleanor's husband. She was crying openly now, tears and mascara streaming down her face. And you couldn't even love me. She shoved him. John stumbled backward. His foot caught on the edge of the curb. His arms windmilled, grasping at empty air. He fell. Not gracefully, not dramatically, just fell, like a man who had forgotten how to stand. His back hit the muddy grass beside the parking lot. Dirty water splashed up, soaking his white shirt, his dress pants, his carefully styled hair. He lay there, sprawled in the mud, staring up at the gray October sky. The crowd gasped. Phones rose higher. Somewhere, a woman laughed nervously. Melissa stood over him. Her wedding dress was ruined, mud-stained, ripped, hanging off one shoulder. Her hair had come undone, falling in tangled strands around her face. Her makeup was a disaster, but her eyes were clear. We're done, she said. The wedding is off. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger and threw it at him. It bounced off his chest and landed in the mud beside his head. Then she turned and walked away. Not toward the hall, not toward the guests. She walked across the parking lot, past the rows of cars, toward the road, her ruined dress dragged behind her like a ghost. She didn't look back. John sat up slowly. Mud dripped from his hair, his clothes, his face. He picked up the ring with trembling fingers and stared at it. The crowd remained frozen on the steps. 100 people, dressed in their finest, watching a man sit in the mud at his own wedding. Eleanor stood by the Bentley, her heart pounding. She should feel vindicated. She should feel satisfied. After more than 2 decades of being overlooked, ignored, replaced, this was justice. Wasn't it? This was karma, delivered in real time, but all she felt was hollow. John looked up. His eyes found hers across the parking lot. Eleanor, his voice was broken. Help me. She didn't move. Please. He struggled to his feet, mud squelching under his shoes. Everyone is watching. Please, just help me. Eleanor looked at him, at the man she had loved for more than 2 decades, at the father of her son, at the person who had made her feel invisible for years and was now begging her to save him from public humiliation. She thought about all the times she had helped him, made excuses for him, covered for him, protected his image while sacrificing her own. "No," she said. John's face crumpled. "I'm not your wife anymore. John, I'm not the person who fixes things for you." She opened the car door. "You'll have to fix this yourself." She climbed into the Bentley. Henry started the engine. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Eleanor looked in the side mirror. John was still standing there, covered in mud, surrounded by guests who were already backing away. Alone, exposed, the ring glinted in his hand, and, for the first time, Eleanor realized she felt no guilt at all. The Bentley moved through the streets of Greenwood in silence. Eleanor watched the familiar landmarks slide past the pharmacy, the diner, the church where Danny had been baptized. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing them to stop. "You want me to take you home?" Henry's voice was quiet. "I don't know." The words surprised her. She had been so certain, stepping into the car, so clear, but now, with the wedding hall shrinking in the side mirror, something else was rising in her chest, something that felt uncomfortably like doubt. She had left John standing in the mud, covered in dirt, humiliated in front of everyone he knew. More than 2 decades ago, she would have run to him, would have helped him up, brushed off his clothes, made excuses to the guests. That was what wives did. That was what she had always done. But she wasn't his wife anymore. So why did her chest feel so tight? "Pull over," she said. Henry glanced at her. "Here, please." He guided the Bentley to the shoulder of the road. They were on the edge of town now, where the houses thinned out and the fields began. An old oak tree stood nearby, its leaves turning gold. The smell of wet earth and dying grass drifted through the vents. Eleanor opened her door and stepped out. The air was cool against her face. She walked a few steps from the car, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She heard Henry's door open and close behind her. "I didn't plan this," she said without turning around. "I didn't plan any of it." "I know. I just wanted to walk through the door. That's all I wanted, to prove I could do it without falling apart." Her voice cracked. "And instead, I destroyed his wedding. I destroyed his life." "You didn't destroy anything. He's standing in the mud. Henry, his bride left him. Everyone saw." Eleanor's hands were shaking again. "That's not nothing. That's not your fault." She turned to face him. Henry stood by the car, his hands in his pockets, his face calm. The same face she had seen every Thursday morning for months. The same quiet steadiness that had made her trust him in the first place. "Isn't it?" she asked. "If I hadn't come, he invited you. If I hadn't brought you, I offered. You accepted. If I had just stayed home, then what?" Henry's voice was gentle but firm. "You'd be sitting on your porch right now, wondering what was happening, wondering if he was happy, wondering if you'd made the right choice." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Maybe. And that would be better." She didn't answer. The wind picked up, sending the leaves skittering across the road. In the distance, a dog barked. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I keep thinking about what he said," Eleanor murmured. "That he made a mistake. That he—" She stopped, swallowed. "Part of me wanted to believe him." Henry was silent. "Part of me wanted to say, 'I forgive you,' just to make it stop, just to make the hurting stop." She pressed her hand to her chest. "Is that weakness? Is that pathetic?" "No." Henry took a step toward her. "That's human. I almost did it. Standing there on those steps, with him looking at me like I was finally real to him. I almost said the words." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I wanted to so badly. But you didn't." "No." "Why not?" Eleanor thought about the question. Thought about John's face when he told her he loved her. Thought about the desperation in his eyes, the crack in his voice. He had meant it. She realized, in that moment, he had truly meant it. But meaning something and being something were two different things. "Because it wouldn't have been for me," she said slowly. "If I'd forgiven him, it would have been for him." "To make him feel better? To take away his guilt?" She shook her head. "I've spent more than 2 decades making him feel better. I'm done." Henry nodded. "And Melissa," Eleanor continued, "I keep thinking about her face, the way she looked when she realized she stopped. She was me, Henry. All those years ago, I was her, young, hopeful, believing that I could make him love me if I just tried hard enough. Did I, make him love you?" Eleanor considered the question. She thought about their wedding day, the white dress, the nervous smiles, the way John had kissed her at the altar like she was the only woman in the world. She thought about the first year, when everything had seemed possible. The second year, when the cracks began to show. The third year, when she stopped noticing the cracks because they had become part of the landscape. "I think he loved me," she said. "In his way, but his way was never enough." The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the field. "I said that to him today," Eleanor said. "I told him his way wasn't enough. And you know what I've been wanting to say those words for 20 years. She laughed softly, a tired sound. "I thought it would feel better. I thought it would feel like victory." "Does it?" "No." She looked at Henry. "It just feels empty." Henry held her gaze. "Maybe that's the point," he said. "Maybe the victory isn't in saying the words. Maybe it's in not needing to say them anymore." Eleanor blinked. "What do you mean? You spent all those years waiting for him to see you, waiting for him to acknowledge what he'd done, waiting for him to apologize, to change, to become the man you needed him to be." Henry paused. "Today, he finally saw you. He finally apologized. He finally said all the things you'd been waiting to hear. Yes, and it didn't matter." Eleanor stared at him. "It didn't matter," she repeated, "because you'd already moved on. You'd already stopped waiting." Henry's voice was soft. "The forgiveness you needed, it was never his to give. It was yours." Eleanor's eyes burned. She thought about the porch at home, the 2 wooden chairs, the one that was worn smooth from years of sitting, and the one that was still new because John had never sat in it. She thought about all the mornings she had waited for him, all the evenings she had waited for him, all the years she had spent looking at that empty chair, wondering when he would finally be present. And she realized she had stopped waiting, not today, not at the wedding, but weeks ago, months ago, maybe longer. She had stopped waiting the first Thursday she spoke to Henry at the grocery store, or the first time he carried her bags to the car, or the first time he asked her what kind of apples she liked. She had stopped waiting, and she hadn't even noticed. "I don't need his apology," she said quietly. "I don't need his regret. I don't need him to see me. No, you don't. You. I just needed to stop seeing myself through his eyes." Henry smiled, that small, quiet smile she had come to know. "And have you?" Eleanor looked at the setting sun, at the golden light spilling across the fields, at the long road stretching toward home. "I think so," she said. "I think I finally have." She turned back toward the car. Then she stopped. "Henry?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes." "Why did you really come with me today?" Henry was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone should have asked you that question all those years ago," he said. "And no one did." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. "What question?" Henry looked at her with those patient, weathered eyes. "What do you want?" The Bentley pulled into Eleanor's driveway as the last light faded from the sky. She sat in the passenger seat, watching her house emerge from the dusk. The porch light was on, she had left it burning before she left. not knowing if she would need it. The two wooden chairs sat exactly where they always sat. The apple tree in the yard was a dark silhouette against the purple sky. Henry turned off the engine. Neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just present, like a third person in the car, patient and undemanding. "Would you like to come inside?" Eleanor asked. Henry turned to look at her. His face was half in shadow, half lit by the porch light. "Not tonight," he said. "But I could sit on the porch with you, if you'd like." Eleanor considered this. She thought about the two chairs, the worn one and the new one, the one that remembered her shape and the one that had never known anyone's weight. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." They walked up the path together. The gravel crunched under their feet. A cricket chirped somewhere in the grass. The air smelled like fallen leaves and coming rain. Eleanor lowered herself into her usual chair. The wood creaked beneath her, a familiar sound, as much a part of her evenings as the stars overhead. Henry paused beside the other chair. He looked at it for a moment, as if asking permission. Then he sat. The wood groaned a different sound than Eleanor's chair made, deeper, the sound of something being used for the first time in a long while. She watched him settle into it, watched the chair accept his weight, watched the way his hands rested naturally on the armrests. Something loosened in her chest. They sat in silence. Minutes passed. The sky darkened from purple to black, and stars began to appear, first one, then a handful, then more than she could count. The cricket kept singing. A car drove past on the distant road, its headlights briefly visible through the trees. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She glanced at the screen. Danny. She'd call him tomorrow. "I used to sit here every evening," Eleanor said. Her voice was soft, barely louder than the cricket, waiting for John to come home. Henry didn't respond. He just listened. "Even after he left, I kept coming out here. Same time every night. Same chair." She shook her head slowly. "I told myself it was habit, that I just liked watching the sunset, but I think," she paused, "I think I was still waiting for something. I didn't know what." And now Eleanor looked at the sky, at the stars, at the dark shape of the apple tree and the faint glow of distant houses. "Now I'm not waiting anymore. What changed?" She thought about the question, thought about the grocery store, the apples, the Thursday mornings that had become the anchor of her week without her realizing it. Thought about the wedding, the mud, the look on John's face when he finally saw her. "I stopped hoping someone would tell me I was enough," she said. "I decided to believe it myself." Henry was quiet for a long moment. "My wife used to say something like that," he said finally. "She said the toughest sell is always yourself. She sounds wise." She was. He shifted in the chair, the wood creaking again. "She was also stubborn and impatient and couldn't boil water without burning it, but wise." "Yes." Eleanor smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "What was her name? Margaret. You miss her." "Every day." Henry's voice was steady. "But missing someone isn't the same as being stuck. She would have hated that. She would have told me to stop moping and go find some apples." Eleanor laughed, a surprised sound, rusty from disuse. "Is that why you go to the grocery store every Thursday?" "Partly." He turned to look at her. "It started that way. Now I have a different reason." The cricket stopped singing. In the sudden silence, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. "Henry," she said, "I don't know what happens next. I'm 62 years old. I've been married for most of my adult life. I don't know how to—" She stopped, started again. "I don't know what this is. Does it need to be something? I don't know, doesn't it?" Henry leaned back in his chair. The wood settled under his weight, accepting him. When Margaret died, he said, everyone asked me what I was going to do. Move, travel, find someone new. He shook his head. I didn't have answers. I just had Thursday mornings and a grocery store that smelled like her. And now I have Thursday mornings and a woman who takes 15 minutes to choose apples. Eleanor felt her eyes sting. That's not much of an answer. No, Henry agreed, but it's honest. The silence returned. But it was different now, warmer, somehow, less empty. I'm not ready for promises, Eleanor said quietly. I'm not ready for whatever comes after this. I'm not asking for promises. What are you asking for? Henry turned to face her. His eyes were steady in the starlight. Thursday mornings, he said. That's all. Just Thursday mornings, for as long as you want them. Eleanor looked at him, at this man who had appeared in her life without fanfare, without drama, just a quiet presence in the produce aisle, choosing apples that reminded him of someone he loved. And if I want more than Thursday mornings, then we'll figure that out when we get there. And if I don't, then Thursday mornings are enough. Eleanor turned back to the sky. The stars were brighter now, the moon rising over the tree line. The cricket had started singing again, joined by others. I'll be at the store next week, she said. I know. Same time as always. I'll be there. She nodded. Then, slowly, she reached across the space between them and rested her hand on the arm of his chair. Not touching him, just close, just present. Henry looked down at her hand, then at her face. Honey Crisp? He asked. Eleanor smiled. Honey Crisp. The night settled around them. 2 chairs on a porch. 2 people who had learned to stop waiting. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the yard, across the dying apple tree, across the path that led back to the road. Eleanor didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if this was the beginning of something, or just a pause between endings. She didn't know if she would ever be ready for more than Thursday mornings. But she knew this, she wasn't sitting here because of habit anymore. She was sitting here because she chose to. And, for now, that was enough. Sometimes a story leaves us quiet. Not sad, exactly. Not happy, either. Just quiet the way a room feels after someone has finally said the thing they've been holding for years. Many of us know what it is to wait, to sit in a familiar chair, watching the road, wondering if today will be different. Some of us have loved people who looked right through us. Some of us have spent years being useful without ever being seen. And perhaps you know what it feels like to stop waiting, not because the answer came, but because you finally stopped asking the question. That kind of peace doesn't arrive with trumpets. It comes softly, like the first cool evening after a long summer. It doesn't need to be explained or understood. It's allowed to simply be. If something in this story felt familiar, you don't need to do anything with it. You don't need to resolve it or learn from it or carry it anywhere. Some things are just meant to be felt. Then gently set down. Thank you for sitting with Eleanor tonight, and thank you for staying until the chairs stopped being empty.